Hello, my name is Kimala Rein, and I'm a teacher of children who are blind and visually impaired. As an early interventionist, I go into the homes and help parents do whatever they want to do with their children and act as a resource for the team that is serving that child. That sounds pretty straightforward. However, the interesting part of my job is that the most common cause of childhood vision impairment is a mystery to the professionals working in our field, to the medical people who diagnose these children, and the parents. Therefore, it's not surprising that it is also a mystery to the service coordinators and anybody else on a team of a child who might have this #1 cause of vision impairment. What is the name of this thing? It is often referred to as cortical vision impairment. I'm going to write that down. As a teacher of the visually impaired, it's my job to empower those I work with to fully understand the implications of the vision on this child's daily living. To empower means to hand over the power and the knowledge so that somebody else can do the work. I don't hold the power. I give it away. And I give it away by educating and applying what we know in a meaningful way to the child's life. Okay, so all of you should have one of these in front of you. It is a picture of the inside of an infant's brain. And we're going to use it to remember the important parts of cortical vision impairment. Okay, we're going to start by defining what is ocular vision impairment and what is not an ocular impairment. The first thing you can think of as an ocular impairment would be, let's say, being born without eyes. You don't have your eyes. That is the first part of your brain. It does things. This is my daughter. She has a brain and she's studying anatomy in college. I'm trying to give her some help with her quizzes. She's learning more than I am about anatomy. But what I do now as an early interventionist is that between the ages of 0 to 3, we grow a lot of little synapses in our brain. These have been documented through neuroimaging between the ages of newborn. This is how many little tiny tracks you have of connections in your brain to make you smart. By 1 month, you have this many little connections. 1 month, they get thicker. 9 months, they get thicker. 2 years, and there's an adult. You can squiggle all over your piece of paper. And what early interventionists know is that these things grow due to experiences that the child has. Without any experiences, or with adverse experiences, it's proven we get this many connections. The more positive experiences that a child has and meaningful with love, the more they grow connections. That can be applied to every area of childhood development, but it's especially fun for kids with CVI. Why? Because here's your ocular part of the brain. Experiences don't make that any better. Eye doctors can make that better, maybe. Maybe you're just not having an eye, and there's really not an experience that you can do to make it better. However, what's exciting about CVI is that as our kids develop, they're making all of these new connections in the brain, and that helps them to visually function better. So that's exciting. CVI follows the same sort of possible growth as other skill sets that kids 0 to 3 are so ripe for developing. This is the definition of, well, the newest way that vision professionals refer to brain-based vision issues is broken down into 3 categories, and they're sort of still working out the details of it. The best thing I know that I have figured out in this new and upcoming research is that there's this big umbrella at the top called neurological vision impairment. And underneath that is a word called cerebral vision impairment. And cerebral vision impairment can be categorized as having perceptual difficulties. You can have disordered vision and visual perception of any type or severity as a result to the damage or disorder of the visual pathways of the brain. Some examples of that are face blindness, figure ground perception problems, and dyslexia. Then, what we have underneath cerebral is cortical. Cortical vision impairment also, by definition, means that something bad has happened to the brain. So we'll start with that. There has been some trauma and some damage, or perhaps this condition of the brain that was just born different than a typical brain. You have some medical background. This kid has no ocular explanation for why he's visually acting the way he is. So the eye doctor looks at the eyes and says, these are perfectly healthy eyes, perfectly healthy optic nerve. There's no reason that this kid shouldn't be attending to the toy that you put in front of their face. They should be able to see this. Why aren't they seeing this? Well, go up to the top. This kid has certain criteria that qualify him as having a cortical vision impairment because they're behavior-based. And in this way, I kind of think of it as autism in relation to autism. A doctor doesn't give a diagnosis of autism because he takes some blood and says, oh, I found autism in your blood. Or he doesn't look into their brain and say, oh, I found autism in your brain. They look at the behavior of the child in certain situations, and they say, oh, this kid has that characteristic, and that characteristic. We put those characteristics together, and we can have this name for all those core characteristics called autism. And that's the same thing that we're doing with cortical vision impairment. We're looking at characteristics of how the kid behaves visually, and we put them together, and then we have for the team, for the parents, for the child, a medical reason for their behaviors. It's not the same as autism, but it's the same way it's diagnosed. It's not a physical thing you can actually test and get your genetics back and says, oh, you have autism. It's based on observations of the way a person behaves, a child behaves. Okay, now get out your little piece of paper with your brain and your crayons, and you're going to learn by doing. So what I want you to do is slice the brain in half. I know you've always wanted to do that. So here's your eyes. Your eyes follow an optic nerve back to a geniculate gyrus nucleus. I need to stop a second and look at that word. This is called empowering, letting you know that I need to learn myself how to pronounce things. I got it. Lateral geniculate body. We're going to draw a line up to the lateral geniculate body. And it is, here's your eye, you can outline it, you can look at an optic nerve, and we can draw a little circle. And we're going to call it the lateral geniculate nuclei, LGN. And you can color it in whatever color you want. Okay, you got your color? Yeah. Okay, if you go to the eye doctor, this is what your eye doctor is going to look at. Your eye, and they're going to shine a light into your eye, and they're going to look at your optic nerve. And they're going to look at like how your eye moves. They're not going to look at your brain, okay, beyond this lateral geniculate nuclei. That is an ocular visit. Okay, for this part of your empowerment, you're going to use the handout I gave you to make a brain. So follow the instructions and make a brain. I grabbed this off the internet from some teacher who's teaching kids about the parts of the brain. Now that you're done, you've taped it all together. It should look something like this. You now have a three-dimensional picture of a brain. And we can look at it and learn about how the brain sees. So you'll notice that in the back of your brain, there's a thing called the Occipital Lobe, and there's eyeballs on it. Behind that is a place called the Parietal Lobe, and there's some words on there like understanding dimensions. There's a person who knows where he is in space. Up here, I covered mine up, is more of the frontal lobe, and up here is where it has the words frontal lobe. So this is you learning to make it so you can feel the brain in your hands. Maybe you're a hand learner. Now we're going to sing a song that I made up so that you can remember the parts of the brain, and it's early intervention friendly. So it goes to the tune of Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round. And I will use the clue FPOT. Those are the initials for the parts of our brain that my teacher, Kathy, taught me in my neurological vision impairment class. So it goes frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, occipital, temporal. Okay, I should do it like this. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, occipital, temporal. Do it again. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, occipital, temporal. Actually, it's not Wheels on the Bus Go Round and Round. It's hands, shoulders, knees, and toes. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Wrong song. So, if you want to remember frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, you can start with FPOT for the initials, and then you can add the the hand movements so that you can feel where it is on your body. And this is important to know because a child with cortical vision impairment has a problem with vision because of one or more of these areas being damaged for some reason. There's many things that can damage all these areas, and we're going to go into that, but these are sections of the brain that are responsible for very specific things. So it's good that you have a brain in your hand and you can cheat and look to that as we learn more. Okay, grab out your little piece of brain again, your paper brain, and copy me. I'm going to say the names of what I'm drawing, and you can say it out loud as you draw it too. We already did occipital, it's boring, the ocular vision impairment, up to the lateral geniculate nuclei. Now we're going to understand what that eyeball captured. So the eyeball's a little camera, takes a little picture, sends it to the brain. This is what happens after the picture is taken. The brain has to interpret the image. How does the image get there? It has to travel along some radiations. These optic radiations go to the back of the brain from that lateral geniculate nuclei. And then there's that occipital part that we just made out of our paper, and your image sort of lands there first. There's a huge amount of detail in this part of the brain. Every little cell interprets the image differently. Super, super intricate. But we're just going to leave it at that for today. Then what happens is it doesn't just land there. Oh, there's an image. It's an image. Do you know what image I'm talking about? It's a... No, you don't know what I'm talking about because I haven't given you any information about it. Your brain can't categorize, your brain can't relate to it. You just have an image. So how do you know what the image means? Well, your occipital lobe sends it out to other parts of the brain to consider and to categorize and to make sense of what's the importance of this image that I just got. So up here, parts of the visual image are going to travel along a stream, like a river. Maybe I should make it blue. Make that blue. Do you have a blue crayon? So we'll make this blue for a stream. And this is called the dorsal stream. So write that at the top of your brain. The same image is going to be considered by other parts of the brain on a thing called the ventral stream. Okay? Now we're going to continue with my head, shoulder, knees, and toes to remember ventral and dorsal. So it goes FPOT, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, and then it goes dorsal, ventral, dorsal, ventral. Is there a good way to remember dorsal being up? I don't know. I just go door and vent. Sometimes my vents in my house in Alaska are on the floor and my cat sits on them. So I think of vents as being at the base because my cat likes to sit on them in the winter and get all warm. So there's the vent. It's snowing outside. Vent. And out here is a door going out to the snow. So dorsal, ventral. Streams. And a stream is just carrying the information, parts of the information. It's not the exact image itself. It's just some pieces of the information coming from that occipital lobe and traveling to the ventral stream and the dorsal stream. Now, why is this important? Is because scientists have recently discovered that what we do with the dorsal and the ventral is very different for how we understand what we're looking at. We really have to understand it. So, the dorsal understands where, and ventral understands what. So dorsal is where, and ventral is what. So, I'm going to go with my song again. Not head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, occipital, temporal. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, occipital, temporal. Dorsal, ventral, where and what? Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, occipital, temporal, where and what? Dorsal and ventral. Okay, so as this picture that lands in your occipital lobe travels up, it's going to go into what areas? We just discovered it's going to go into areas that control where your body is in space, set your sensory information, your motor cortex, a lot of information your visualizing is going to be interpreted in a movement sort of way. When it comes down when it goes from your occipital to your temporal lobe, it's traveling in an area that's responsible for distance and detail and rhythm and facial expressions. So that's going to be useful because remember those characteristics that I talked about earlier that help us diagnose a cortical vision impairment? Those characteristics show up differently, show up according to parts of the brain that are affected. So some characteristics of a child with cerebral vision impairment is that they have a color preference, novelty is hard for them, and visual complexity is hard for them. So if there's some sort of damage over here, those are some of the characteristics that can show up for them. It's also distance is hard, and it's hard for them to reach and look, which means that they can see something like this. Oh, I see it. They show some visual awareness, and then when they want to grab it, they kind of look away. That's hard to reach and look. Up on top, I'm going to have you tape all of the characteristics of how a child with CVI has their dorsal stream affected. They have need for light, they have visual field preferences, they have a color preference, they have need for movement, and it's also hard for them to reach and look. A couple of these things go into two different areas. Color preference and hard to reach and look seem to be in both ventral and dorsal. Okay, that was a really basic understanding of CVI. There's books this big that I've tried to squish into this learning experience. So So I've kind of made it super basic, but I think it's fun enough for you to understand and retain so that you can make changes into the child's life that will help them with their vision, which is the most important thing. Super important to know why they're visually acting the way they are. Super important to know then how can we make it better. So if you understand the characteristics of CVI, you can then adapt the child's world to make it more understandable. You can help the child learn to use their vision as it is and improve their vision. You look at how the child is currently functioning. You make some adaptations to your routine of eating, playing, bathing, so that during those times you can use your vision, your child can use their vision to the best of their ability, and you've made it doable for them. You haven't given them too hard a thing to look at during bath. You've given them just enough right amount of something to look at bath time, so they can say, "That's my soap. I've seen that soap before. I'm going to categorize it. I'm going to say, it's a thing. It's got a name. It's soap. And there's my washcloth. The washcloth waves around a lot, and it goes all over my body. I'm going to use, when I look at that washcloth, I'm going to be using part of my dorsal stream to contemplate that vision that I just experienced." All right. So that's the work you're going to carry out in your daily life, is adapting your daily routine to accommodate for their needs, their special needs for different ways of presenting materials that makes more sense to them. And babies 0 to 3, they're mostly into love and play and eating. So those are probably the areas you're going to adapt the most. And we are going to have to make some goals together. So if we're going to make some strategies around vision, we better understand what those strategies are. And those strategies relate to what you just learned and put on your hat. We're going to reduce visual complexity. We're going to understand that novelty is hard, so it's easier to look at things that we know. We're going to learn that our kids might have a color preference, so if we really want them to love the soap or look at the soap, it's not going to be a rainbow colored crazy pile of soap, it's going to be a red soap. And if we're at the playground, we're going to know that the kid is seeing things close to them and they are not seeing things far away from them. So if we want to make a friend, we get close to the friend, and we might do some non-visual communication as well. All right. Okay, so back to learning more of the anatomy of the brain and relating it to why our kids see the way they do. As you remember, we talked about how this little section of our body is the ocular part of vision, and the rest of it up here beyond this lateral geniculate nuclei is where we do all of our vision work, understanding. Here's where we take the picture. Here's how we understand the picture. When you have a CVI, you tend to show 10 characteristics of behaviors, visual behaviors that are used to identify kids with vision with these CVI needs. So I gave you 10 sticky notes, and we're going to list the characteristics and stick them on the brain. All right, the first characteristic that I'm going to talk about is latency. Latency. You can think of this as they're late to respond. So I show the kid a marker. Oh, marker. It took a while. Latency means it takes a while. Sometimes I do a silent count. I present a toy and I demonstrate to the parent quietly without any noise. Count up to 20 with your fingers quietly and wait for a visual response. Latency is a quality. Another one is preference for a specific color. So I'll just write color preference. This means that a child has gotten good at seeing one color for some reason. Sometimes it's because it's easier for the brain to see certain colors, like red and yellow. They're just more available to our brain. Or it's because they've had more experience with a certain color. So maybe they've had a purple cow since they were in the NICU. They're going to be better at seeing things that are purple because they've had experience. Environmental, purposeful experience makes us make connections. Making purple connections. So, they have a preference for a certain color. The next one is absent visual guided reach. We'll call it absent look reach. So, that's when a kid sees it, and then in order to grab it, decides I'm using turning off my vision during this task of grabbing. The other one is atypical visual behaviors. Atypical means not what you normally see. Normally, kids follow things easily. There's just ways that kids use their vision in typical ways, and these kids don't. Difficulty with complexity. So this is a big one for our kids because the toys they get tend to be from very good-hearted people who want this blind baby to see something, so they get the most obnoxious toy possible. Let me think. So many things you can't understand what's going on, and the toy becomes a crazy, undefinable thing. What is it? Where is it? I don't know. Can't really tell. Nothing really clear. So let me give you an example of that. Okay, I went looking for a toy in my repertoire of toys that was visually complex, and I don't own any because I don't use them. So here's an example of a visual complexity. This is a bag of candy because it's Valentine's Day. And it's kind of complex because there's all kinds of colors, and the little yellow one is harder to find than the purple one, and all different shapes. So that's visually complex. This is not. It's 1-2 colors. So lots of information to figure out, not a lot of information to figure out, even less. A kid with CVI would prefer to learn from this first, and then with enough time and we develop some synapses, then we're going to move on to finding a yellow heart. Okay, another characteristic is that they need movement to see. So if I hold this here, maybe the child doesn't demonstrate any visual curiosity or visual awareness. However, if I kind of go like this, there might be the ability to look with that support. Or I can hold this still and then move the baby, and maybe the baby can see better when I'm moving the baby. So movement can be object moving, or movement can be person moving. You have to kind of figure it out with each person individually. Okay, on your next piece of paper, write down weird field of vision. So right now, if you hold yourself still and you play with your hands, you can tell where you can start to see your hands. You can start to see them right there. You can start to see them holding your head still without moving them. You can kind of, oh, there I see my hands, and you can kind of do it underneath. So you're testing your own field of vision. That's to the extreme part of it that you can see. And when there's a whole field there, and these kids can be missing the bottom field, so maybe they're not aware that they have feet, or they don't know things that are at their feet. Maybe they're missing a right side or left side. They just tend to have something different. It's a clue to CVI. Okay, and another thing is that they like to look at lights. Lights are easy to see. So they will stare at a window. They won't stare at a lovely stuffed animal or mom's face, but they'll just stare at the window. Sometimes you'll see them stare at a mirror, and people think that they're staring at their face, but really it's just light. Some people say that they're watching TV, but really they're just staring at light coming through a TV. Sometimes I'll demonstrate that a bowl kind of looks like a headlight on a car because it's reflecting light at you. So kids will really like a bowl because it reflects the light. There is also, it's hard to see in the distance. They've got a problem with distance. That means sometimes that a kid will hold something really close to see it, and that might be a way for them to get rid of clutter in the background, but it helps them to attend visually if they see something close. If it's beyond like 3 feet, sometimes no response. So you present things within 3 feet and you slowly move outwards as their visual attention grows. Their brain gets more opportunities for visual growth. And then our last one is difficulty with new things, visual novelty. Visual novelty. So, say you're a baby born in Hawaii and you've seen coconuts all the time, and you take out the coconut and the baby's like, there's my coconut, we play the coconut game, I love coconut. But then you present something to the kid that is a brown teddy bear, but they've never seen a teddy bear. They don't respond to it. It's just like, because it's not what they already know. They already knew the coconut. They had some time to think about it. They had time to categorize it in a place in their brain. They had to reroute their brain to make that categorization. So that was really easy. Now you've just given them another hard thing to learn. And so like, oh, this is hard. You can get there. You can add new things. But if you want to learn something, I don't know, not related to the coconut, maybe in, out, you want to teach the kid how to put something in and out of a bowl. You don't go grab a brand new item like, oh, you've never seen this before, but we're going to do in and out today, because there's too much work going into what is that, why is that, what, I don't think I have the visual energy to care about that. Whereas if you use a familiar item, the coconut, you're like, oh, that's my coconut, oh, it's doing stuff, oh, it goes in, it goes out. So you have the ability to see, and then you pair it with something harder. You don't take something harder and pair it with something harder. So that's why it's important to pay attention to what a kid is already good at looking at, and use it to your advantage in teaching as a strategy in 0 to 3. So now that we have all of these, we're going to place them onto parts of the brain that they relate to. Okay. We have a need. Here's your brain. You can stick it on your brain. a need for light has to do with your dorsal stream. It needs less complexity. It goes down here with your ventral stream. Having a problem with the distance actually is in both places, so we're going to leave it up there. It goes in both. Having a field loss has to do with your ventral, where is it, field. The need for movement has to do with your, I think dorsal is what I meant to say, your dorsal need for movement for field. So need for movement is also in dorsal. Color preference is in both the ventral and the dorsal, so we'll leave it up there. An absent look reach is in both the ventral and the dorsal, so we'll leave it up there. It goes into two categories. And the atypical visual responses, those go into, I have to look it up, I don't know, I'm going to put that aside. Visual novelty, that goes down into the ventral, and latency goes up into the dorsal. So I've just piled mine on top of another, but yours should just now have the 10 characteristics as related to the dorsal stream and the ventral stream. Okay, so here's in a way that I remember the different areas of the brain that do different sorts of visual processing. Okay, here's an analogy that I use to remember what parts of the brain do what when it comes to using vision for a purpose. So I'm going to draw a rough image of this brain here. You can draw one on the bottom of your sheet, make your own little brain. Doesn't have to be perfect. Make a brain too, because this is going to be our way of remembering what happens with the visual picture that we receive from our eye. Okay, you know, our perfectly good eye relays some perfectly good information to our lateral geniculate nuclei. However, some things go wrong in these other parts of the brain with understanding the picture because there's been some trauma to the brain or a infection or congenital malformation of the brain or all sorts of medical conditions that have created the brain to not work as good as it's supposed to. It's not connecting, it's not got all of the pieces that it needs in order to smoothly interpret visual information. So imagine that your family is going on a vacation, and I'm going to call this Papa D, and this is going to be that nice, I guess I'm kind of making it, there's a mama, I don't know if I lost this one. Okay, I have drawn a map of the brain, and I'm going to use an analogy to understand the dorsal and ventral streams of vision so that you can remember how it works. here's my map of the brain. There's my eye, my optic nerve, totally healthy, bringing information into the middle of the brain, this little nuclei, and then it's got to travel all around the brain in all these different areas that we talked about before that has to make sense of that information. So in order to start my story, here's Papa D, Papa dorsal, and this is Mama ventral. Okay, they want to go on a vacation and they can't really decide where they want to go because they like different things. So Papa dorsal wants to go to a theme park. Why would he want to go to a theme park? Because he has a need for movement. Mama ventral wants to go to the museum. Why does she want to go to the museum? Because she doesn't like visual novelty and she wants to see that one favorite painting again that she can't get enough of. Papa dorsal wants to go to the theme park because he loves all the lights there. And Mama wants to go to the museum because distance is hard for her. She has a problem with distance. And she wants to stand right up close to that painting. Get really close with her favorite painting of Elmo. Okay. Papa dorsal wants to go to the theme park because he has a weird visual field. This is a stretch, but how I'm going to relate this one is when he's at the theme park, he doesn't care about all the popcorn on the ground. He doesn't even pay attention to the popcorn on the ground. He is just happy to look at all of the other stuff up high. So that's where dorsal lives. For Mama ventral, she wants to go to the museum because at the museum she likes to name things. She goes, "What is in that painting? It's my favorite painting of Elmo again. And I've had this name for it. It's Elmo. I love it." And she wants to also go there because this is where they share something in common. It has a color. She has a color preference. So at the museum, she loves red. He has the same thing up there. He has a color preference. He also loves red. So, where'd my brain go? Color preference. They both have color preference. Okay. And another characteristic of CVI is latency. However, it's uncertain where latency is located in the brain. It's thought to be somewhere outside of the ventral or dorsal. So, has nothing to do with Papa or Mama, so we're going to put it over here. Latency shows up in kids with CVI, but they can't relate it to a specific part of the ventral or dorsal stream. The other thing that's not with Papa or Mama is atypical vision behaviors. Those are thought to be somewhere beyond the dorsal and ventral streams of vision. So hopefully that helps. You can think of your dorsal stream because Mama doesn't like visual novelty. That place up there is too much full of visual novelty. She wants to go see that same Elmo again. She has a problem with distance, so she really wants to get close to the painting. She has a color preference, and she likes to name things. And up here, Papa, dorsal, has a need for movement, so he wants to go to the theme park. He likes lights at the theme park, and he has a weird field of vision, so he doesn't have to pay attention to the popcorn on the ground, and he can just pay attention to everything else up high. He also has a color preference at the theme park, and he's really glad that the theme park he goes to is sponsored by 3M, and everything is yellow. It's the 3M theme park. Okay, so, because who I'm talking to, my audience is a 0 to 3 service provider for audience, for kids, you're going to understand exactly what I'm about to say. In the general population, not a lot of people know what I'm going to start to talk about, but you're going to know these things way more than you've heard these things way more than you've ever heard of CVI. If you're in 0 to 3, you've heard of a stroke. If you're in 0 to 3, kids with delays, you've heard about periventricular leukomalacia. If you're in 0 to 3, you've probably heard about a kid with asphyxia. If you're in 0 to 3, you probably had some kids with some infections. You've probably had some kids who came out of the NICU with some interventricular hemorrhages from 1 up to 5. You probably have some kids whose brains aren't shaped the same as other kids. There's something wrong with the structure of their head. You probably have some kids with a metabolic disease. You can look at that in their from their doctor reports when you get your referrals. They probably have some genetic disorders. A lot of genetic disorders, a lot of chromosomal problems that cause delays. And then, unfortunately, in 0 to 3, there is a huge amount of kids we see who have developmental delays due to an acquired brain issue. Usually that's some sort of trauma, accidental, or more often non-accidental, shaken baby, or being hit. So, I have put some of the things that are associated with injuries to the brain in the middle. Asphyxia, you don't get enough oxygen or glucose to your brain, so parts of your cellular structure die off, and therefore you can't get your little signals through well. Interventricular hemorrhage, you have a little bleed in your brain because you're really delicate when you're young. A lot of kids are premature, and the brain cannot come out of the womb strong enough, and they're kind of weak, and so they'll have little accidental hemorrhages in the brain after they're born in the NICU, just kind of waiting around to get healthy. And a lot of kids will have stroke. Sometimes people know the reason of the stroke, and sometimes the doctors don't know. The kids have infections like I'm drawing a blank. Can't think of the word. I'm going to cheat. Meningitis. Meningitis was the word I was looking for. And also the torch infections, which are toxoplasmosis, rubella, cytomegalic inclusion disease, and herpes. These are things you can get an infection from in utero. And they will affect the way your brain functions. So I put the structure and metabolic, genetic, and acquired disorders at the back of the brain near the occipital area because those are where those mostly happen. And then all around the brain I put the other ones, an intraventicular hemorrhage and PVLs. They happen a lot near the ventricles. So you know what they are. You see them on the pediatric referral sheet, but they do not come with the explanation that this child has an IVH grade 4 and a vision impairment. I've never seen that from the NICU. I get IVH grade 4. You get PVL, but you don't get PVL. Watch out for the vision that's going to be affected by a PVL. You never get things like hydrocephaly, and make sure, on the piece of paper referral, make sure to watch out for the fact that this kid might not visually be as aware in a typical way and might have cerebral vision impairment. So you don't get any of those. I will read to you what I always get. When a kid is referred for early intervention, you get a write-up from their pediatrician, and a lot of the times you get what your kid's ASQ and their diagnoses. Here we got a non-syndromic congenital hydrocephalus due to aqueductal stenosis, ICD-10 code Q03.0. There's nothing said about vision. However, now you know that if you have hydrocephalus, your brain has been affected, and therefore one of your ventral or your dorsal stream is going to be affected, and you're going to see differently. Even with a perfectly good eyeball, you're going to see differently because you've had something happen to your brain that has caused your information to travel differently, and for this child to understand vision differently. So, as a service coordinator, that should be a red flag to look for possible developmental delay or other things like cerebral palsy, but that's not even on here. Cerebral palsy is not even on here. As a service coordinator, a little flag might go off in your head going, oh, kids who have hydrocephalus often have cerebral vision impairment. I should ask a teacher of the visually impaired if she thinks a cortical vision impairment assessment might help the family understand why the child is visually behaving the way he is with his toys in his daily life. Okay, so I feel like I've given enough of an intro to the condition known as cortical vision impairment so that other early interventionists and family members can have a foundational understanding of why a kid might look like they can't see and act like they can't see, have characteristics that are different than other kids with ways they can't see, but the eye doctor says is normal. That should empower you then to accept that your child sees differently, accept that you're going to need to teach the child differently, and plan how to change your presentation of materials and life so that they can either see it better, touch it better, or hear it better in order to absorb the information. Kids who are visually impaired have lack of access. What we do in early intervention is we give them access to the things that cause brain growth. Things that cause brain growth are positive interactions, lots of repeated, meaningful positive interactions, and also in early intervention we want the parents to feel like what they are trying to do is doable. So we want to give them the right tools to accomplish what they want to accomplish with their goals. If they say they want their kid to walk, we need to think of things that a kid with CVI would need in order to walk, and let them know how they can adopt their home and the way they interact with their kid so that their kid can visually process, visually understand walking better with certain adaptations than if we just treated them like a typical visually capable, fully visually capable child. Again, this is a doctor referral for a vision impairment. All it says is if a kid functions visually and what their diagnosis is. They can say that they meet the diagnosis of blindness or functions at the degree of blindness. However, I think we need to have a doctor form that says they function like a blind person because they have an owie here, owie here, owie here, owie here, owie here, owie here, and check those little boxes. And then we would understand them better. But doctors don't say your kid has an interventricular hemorrhage. You need to see a teacher that's visually impaired to make sure that they're using their vision to the best way they can. Nope, they say you have an intraventricular hemorrhage. You need OT and PT and SLPs. However, OTs, PTs, and SLPs, their job is to teach the kid and make them capable. It would be great if those professionals could partner with teachers of the visually impaired who understand how to adapt learning opportunities to meet the visual needs of the child or the non-visual needs of the child, so the child has better access to learning than without those adaptions. And the sooner the better. There's a window of opportunity for growing all these little connections that need to happen sooner. This is not something from my reading, but something that I would like to also say about early intervention for kids with cerebral vision impairment. We need to acknowledge that they don't see because the parents are heartbroken that they don't get visual responses during feeding. I've seen that a lot where a mom says, it looks like they can kind of see the doors, they look at the lights, but they don't look at me. The mom feels like she's not loved. And you, as a TVI, can go in there and explain why the kid is behaving like that. Not because the kid doesn't love you, but because the brain functions in a different way, and how we can adapt the environment to help the child look at you, or if they can never look at you, how to adapt your non-visual communication so that you can bond despite vision impairment. And that way, the child can learn every day and everyday routines, and the mom can go, oh, I get it. Nobody explained this to me in the hospital, but now that I know my kid needs certain things, I'm willing to do it. Thank you very much, and this was my first attempt at describing CVI in a way that can be understood by a team of professionals working with babies. So I hope that it made some sense. If you still have questions, let me know, because I am a work in progress. I claim progress rather than perfection in my understanding of cortical vision impairment.